Art Meets Radical Openness. Organized by Service at T.
The future is uncertain, but we will be back. We promised. So, good evening and welcome to this first session within our digital version of Art Meets Radical Openness. The title of this session is Intimacy and its Technological Discontents, 3 Theses while Social Distancing. My name is Uschi Reiter. I'm chair lady of Servus.at and former as well as still active developer in the background of this event. With me on this virtual stage tonight is Nishan Shah, who is well known that he works at the intersection of technology, affect, identity, social and political movements. He appeared to me as a super active and fast reacting person with a great sense of humor that I immediately felt comfortable with. So if you want to find out more about Nishan, just open a tab and DuckDuckGo him. After seeing Nishan's keynote at the Impact Festival in Utrecht last November, I immediately wanted to get in touch with him, and so I did. After exchanging some emails and one online meeting about the current situation of the lockdown and its effects, he came up with the idea to produce 3 10-minute videos, which could preview before the event, which I thought was a great idea. So welcome, Nishan. I don't see you yet, but I think that Davide did unlock you. Then I am waiting just a little bit. Hi, Nishan. Welcome. Then I would also like to welcome Vali Djordjevic, whom I was able to persuade to join me and support me in this conversation. Wow, she is here now. I can see you. Hi, Vali. Vali is a longtime friend, blogger, journalist, feminist, and also about her you can find out more just while listening to our conversation. So I would start with a kind of warming up episode with Nishant and how I remember him. During the Impact Festival last November, Nishant, you opened your keynote with a comment that I remember. You said, "You wonder why the conference room is so crowded when we have every opportunity to use digital technology and watch lectures in a much more comfortable surrounding like at home." Well, 4 months later, we do have exactly this situation without any other option. And so my question is, how are you thinking about this today, and how did you experience the last months of being locked down?
Thank you. I just want to, that's a strange question. It's a reminder of how I don't remember anything that I said, but other people do. I just want to begin by thanking you and the team and all the responders today who have taken so much time and energy to put this together. I know it has been such a short time, and the fact that you guys have been able to just move everything online and were so open to experimenting and just figuring out different formats was also inspiring to a lot of us who are presenting our content and ideas and saying, oh yeah, this is something we can do. So thank you. As for that opening remark, I know I've been kind of saying that for 2 years at different places because I always am surprised that people do actually make the effort of going somewhere. Because let's face it, one of the biggest things that stands out for me in the last 2 months, apart from a lot of other problems with health and resources and anxiety about my parents and my family back in India and so on, the one thing that I continuously worry about is that when real life starts again, I don't know how I will go back to wearing pants. Like I have not worn anything except for sweatpants and I only wear like Skype attires from now on. Like that's all I'm going to do. But I think one of the things that has continued to stay with me is how much agency had a role to play in defining how we occupy different spaces and who we occupy them with. So right now I'm feeling almost slightly emotional because I know some of the people who are coming online later. And I'm like, oh my God, this is why I first said yes to be a part of this conference, because I wanted to be with those people. And I'm still being with them, but it's not going to be the same. And I think it's not going to be the same simply because all of our interaction is going to be so transactional. And I think if there is one thing I want to bring to the experience of the last 2 months is a recognition that the digital presence forces us to become transactional with each other. My favorite science fiction and fantasy writer, Terry Pratchett, had once said that the biggest sin that we can commit is when we treat people like things. And within the digital space, all we can do is treat each other like things. Things that come in and out of our view, flattened on our surfaces, and no capacity to reach out and touch or do something. And yes. I think that's something we're going to have to be worried about going into the future, that this doesn't become the new normal.
Yes, you're right. So, of course, we want to talk about your great input you did, like with your 3 videos about the topic of intimacy. And Wally was so kind to try to make a summary for those people like who didn't see the video yet. And I want to ask Wally if you can take over now the mic, so to say.
Okay. Hi. Yes, it was great that Nishan sent us these videos. So we had the an input and a kind of inspiration what to talk about. And I want to have, I did a short summary, and of course it's very shorter than the 3 videos. So if there are possible misunderstandings, we can talk about it later, and maybe misunderstandings are sometimes also a great and very fruitful for discussion. So, yes, in the 3 videos, you provide us with 3 critical interventions considering digital intimacy. I will summarize now shortly and then maybe ask you to elaborate on some points, what I didn't understand, but we also have like a lot of responders and respondents that we invited to watch these videos, and I see already 6 of them are in the chat, and they will be with us later and respond live. And we also have some other questions that came from people who can't be with us, but sent us remarks, questions on the topic by email. So thank you to them also. I mean, we already are in the middle of a discussion, and this is just like the culmination of it, which is very exciting. So the 3 points that you sent us, you said that they are often overlooked in the current situation when talking about digital technologies that are presented to us as saviors in our current situation. So they're allowing, like digital technologies are presented like they're allowing us to be intimate outside of the danger that is outside, so in the safety of our homes. The first intervention deals with the fact that intimacy only works if it's reciprocal and voluntary. So if it's not reciprocal, it becomes a kind of violence in the end. And you were using Sarah Ahmed's example of the feminist killjoy. So technology is not neutral also, but shapes and controls intimacy. For example, through Facebook's real name policy, where people can't choose their identity, and the name is a kind of signifier of identity. Maybe we can talk later about other examples and what this exactly means. So the second intervention, the second video, deals with the historical dimension of how bodies are shown and defined. You are using this, I guess, very well-known image of Kim Kardashian a few years ago, where she broke the internet, or where the paper that published this thing kind of said, this will break the internet. So whatever breaking the internet means in this sense. But when one looks more in detail at the iconography of this image, it goes back to very racist and sexist tropes and a showing of certain bodies that are not in power. So in this sense, it's kind of interesting, I think, what I found interesting, how this Kim Kardashian image relates really to the image of other black bodies in this case, when Kim Kardashian is in a totally different position power-wise than, for example, than this Sarah Baartman, this woman that got abducted, I guess, from Africa in the 19th century and shown in freak shows throughout Europe. And the third point that I find also very important and very interesting is how in technology, in order for us as whatever middle class, educated people to be intimate on social media or with technology, that the work of other people that are working in the background is made invisible. And you also said that it has necessarily be invisible. Without this invisibility, the intimacy wouldn't work. So I found that a really important and interesting point, because it also, like, I guess, connect the broader discussion of technology, workers' rights, how work is reconfigured in digital technology. But in this sense, just like for the people who haven't seen it, the example is, for example, for us when we are on Facebook or other social media, in the background there are thousands of people, mainly working in the global south, who are like filtering our social media content. So we don't see, I don't know, too much sex, too much violence, and yeah, but they are not deciding what is filtered by themselves, but they are of course working according to policies that are coming from other people. So this is, like I said, just like a very short and very, I guess, yeah, the summary. I just picked out some points also that are interesting to me. I'm just also want to introduce maybe who will join us later, and who I saw in the video, so that or in the side page of our chat. We have Anna Bromley from Berlin here, Tina Auer from Linz, René Hohmüller from Graz, Mika Yokama from Vienna, Diana McCarthy also from Berlin, and Nikki Stevens, who sits in the Midwest but teaches in the US. So just keep it like that. So if you want to say something and join us later, maybe you can just like, and I also have like, of course, some pointers, but maybe you can also just write in the chat, like, here I am, this is my question, then we can take you into our conversation and also make you visible. But my first question.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say, just let us know if we should unlock someone.
Yeah, exactly. So my first question for a start would be that it seems to me that technological intimacy is very commodified through the social media platforms. And that is not just something that is now happening through the pandemic, but also before. I mean, just thinking about online dating, for example, where there is a very commodification of this very intimate fact of meeting someone for whatever, sex or dating or something. Do you think that now we have a new quality, or is it just like a culmination of all the points that we already experienced before? So is there something special with the virus now that there wasn't there before?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening with so much care and pulling out these points. It's always very reassuring to hear somebody else speak about your work and like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. And like, thanks for pulling that out. I think it's a great question. So I think one of the reasons why when Ushi and I started talking about concentrating on the contemporary moment, the reason I wanted to talk about intimacy is because there is a shift that has happened here. So we've kind of been used to the idea of technology as facilitating intimacies of different kinds, right? So if you look at the entire platform economy, it is in some way to make a direct connection with different kinds of resources, be it lovers on Tinder, be it food on Uber Eats, be it taxis, be it Airbnbs and other people's home. The promise has always been that digital technologies are cutting the middle people and they are giving us direct access into the space of the private, the personal, the emotional, and in the case of Tinder, the libidinal, so to speak. But when you go into a voluntary state of isolation, and these technologies then become the only point of contact and the only point of access to almost any service that you can think of, from education to relationships to family, conjugality, domesticity, and so on. You're also developing an intimate relationship with the technological device itself. Like, I don't know how many of you have now started sleeping with your devices because your partners are no longer in your beds with you. Like, I'm now extremely scared when somebody visits my house. Well, nobody does, but when they do, I know that, once upon a time you had to clean out all the porn. I feel like now I'll have to clean out all my rooms of digital devices, which need to be removed because of the perverted and the intimate relationship I have with them. And this is not just at the level of fetish, right? It's not just the form of my phone and the fact that I touch it all the time and I depend upon it to make me live. But in the developing of this intimate relationship with my phone, I am in fact buying into three things. The first, I'm going to now pretend that between me and the phone is a direct feedback loop, which no longer involves anybody else in that system. So it's not just the women and the queer people who are excluded from it. It's not just the laborer who's made invisible, the technology company that's lobbying and doing different kinds of policies. But the fact that I'm no longer thinking of my phone as a device, but as an intimate object, which means that it appears with a promise of happiness. Right? It demands that. And that my survival depends upon touching the phone in a certain way and being touched by it in a certain way is a definitely new phenomenon. Because we have never spent so much conscious time with our screens, being so intimate, trying to pretend that this is a direct connection and that everything else needs to be made invisible, so to speak. So I think that's why I'm kind of trying to concentrate on this moment of forced intimacy with our digital devices to try and see if something has changed. That from machines and devices which were supposed to deliver intimacy to us, these have become the objects of intimacy for us. And in that paradigm, what becomes invisible, what gets eroded, what kind of gets completely left out of this particular idea, I thought was something that would be worth thinking through.
Maybe I have a question to follow up. I wonder, I mean, you mentioned it already, or like you told us now, but I wonder how intimacy is shaped and changed by technology and why most of the people do not feel being violated by the technology we use. I'm trying to reference the example you mentioned where you described the intimate situation during a family meeting where someone's touch can be perceived as wrong. finding a way of being connected through a technology within a community of same interest makes sense, but still raises the same question. If we think about who is behind the most used platforms and for what purpose, and my question is, why is there so less resistance or a critical approach? Is it a matter of digital literacy?
That's really interesting. I would say it's actually a question of digital agency. And at least in the English language, it has a lot to do with how we deal with the question of touch, right? So touch is a very strange, conceptually a word, because when you say touch, you are not sure whether it is a verb or a noun. And generally, it is simultaneously both the things. That to be touched, you have to touch. Like there is an interface which immediately comes into being. And the interactions with digital objects, especially digital objects with interfaces and graphical user interfaces, which has become the de facto way of our understanding of the world that we live in, is that it simultaneously keeps us off balance. So when we think about our phones and other digital objects or technologies or platforms, and we think about how they touch us, we then become the site that is being touched by the phone in a certain way. My favorite example comes from work that I've been doing with young users of the internet. And I remember for the longest time how fascinated people were in trying to figure out what they should look like in the selfies that they make of themselves. The right posture, the right shape, the right angle, the right puckering of the face, the duck eyes, the sparrow eyes, whatever else there was going around. And a lot of this way in which we presented ourselves to the technology felt like a moment of agency, right? That I am taking control of how I am being perceived, how I'm being looked at. I can filter it, Photoshop it, manipulate it, and put it on a side. Except that what we forgot in those moments is that entire genre of this artistic creation of selfies is based on hardware protocols of how cameras were put into our phones, in what particular positions, which necessitated that we presented ourselves in a certain way to look in a way that is desirable to us more than anything else. So there has always been this kind of feedback loop where digital devices, material technologies, touch us as a verb. They have agency. And I don't mean agency in terms of materiality and shape and design, but they actually demand a certain kind of presentation and engagement from us, which is particularly fascinating. At the same time, when we engage with the digital devices, we keep on feeling that we are completely in control, and when we touch something, it is only a one-way direction. And Wendy Chun, who I also refer to in the talk, has a very fascinating formulation for it. She says the more our devices become transparent, the more they become opaque. And she is referring to an opacity where our devices are hiding what happens to our touch when our finger touches the screen. The multiple layers of software, hardware, artificial intelligence rendering that happens for a decision to be made is something that often is hidden. And perhaps that's why we keep on forgetting that the presence of this device is as intrusive or as violating as many other hostile touches, because we keep on believing that we are in control when we are working with this device, that we are the verb and this is the noun. Whereas we can sometimes forget that there is also the reciprocal feedback loop where the roles change and this thing becomes the verb and we become the nouns and the sites upon which we are going to be operating.
We have already in the chat a lot of people joining in, and so I would like Reni and Anna, and I think Nikki too. So I would like open up, because I mean we just have these 45 minutes, so it would be great so we can talk all, and the questions sound really interesting, so they can say them themselves and I don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are two. Yeah, great. Hi.
Hi, hello. I took the time also because I knew about your video snip, like the 30 minutes to watch it, and I think there's one relation to what you've been talking about now with this, with the technologies and the devices becoming so opaque, is the bigger and bigger difficulty to actually express a deviant way of being. You know, like something that is not. I wouldn't even say that it's not thought to be there, but it's just not frameable in that surrounding that we are. And I'm, after these 2 months, I'm really crazy already with all these rectangular representations of people. Yeah, so we all get shaped in the same way, in a certain way. And you pointed it out in one of your videos that the possibility to be resilient, to be resistant and to deviate from whichever type of normative behavior becomes more and more difficult. And it's kind of as if there was a bottleneck through which we have to express all that we think we are, like each individual, in all the different ways of identities. And I think that's something really important to look at, what it actually does to us, how it reshapes us again. Yeah, that we became a bit freer maybe already, and now we fall back into, it's kind of a stream. Maybe you want to, I don't know what your further thoughts on that are.
Oh, that's such an insightful comment. In my other work, I have thought about it and worked with other people, and I shouldn't take credit for it, but I'm going to try and say that one of the reasons why the calls for openness, to kind of come back to why we are here together, one of the reasons why the calls for openness has been this exciting is not necessarily because of redistribution of equity and ownership, but because of the redistribution of narrative powers of what gets counted as deviant, right? That there is so much authority in closed taxonomies and classifications about how I get mapped in my granularity over multiple databases over which I have no control, is something that definitely needs to be thought through. And I actually have been doing a lot of conversations with my grandmother, who's 86 years old now, trying to think through her encounters with the digital. So my grandmother, let me just preface it, is not a deviant person in any normalizing form, right? She's like a very nice, slightly grouchy 86-year-old upper middle class Indian woman who has discovered technology and is quite fascinated by that. And at the same time, my grandmother is continuously being portrayed as somebody who is either deviant in two ways: deviant as ignorant, as somebody who doesn't know how to work with technology, or deviant as somebody who has to be rehabilitated into the folds of technology. Like, one of my favorite stories is when I was visiting my grandmother a couple of years ago, and she's recently discovered, like, she's got an iPad now and she talks to Siri. And she was super excited because she found a picture of the house that she had grown up in when she was like 12 years old, and she had no photographic images of that before that. So she wanted to show it to me. She takes out her iPad and then she's writing or typing, except that she speaks Gujarati. There is no Gujarati keyboard for it. So she's typing on like a virtual keyboard in Gujarati, which translates that into English and then talks to Siri. And then Siri gives a feedback and an answer. So it's been 15 minutes and my grandmother's like typing with 2 fingers, and then I lose my patience and I'm like, okay, what's happening? And I just look at the screen and I realize that my grandmother actually, every time she begins a conversation with Siri, she begins by saying, "Hi Siri, how are you doing? How is the day today?" And then by the time I looked at the screen, she's talking about how I am her grandson and I live in the Netherlands, but I've come to visit her. And remember the other day when we saw a picture together of our house. And I looked at my grandmother and I said, "You don't need to do this. You just need to type here and say search and you will get this result." And then she looked at me with this great disappointment in her eyes. And then she said, "I thought you were raised better." Right? That like, how could you be possibly so rude to somebody who is helping you? And I just realized that I actually, in my head, when I saw that interaction with my grandmother, I did treat her as deviant, either somebody who does not know better or somebody who has to be rehabilitated into becoming a good, efficient user, what is imagined as the efficient user of search engines in that space, right? And then here is my grandmother coming from a completely different idea, saying, how can you reduce a conversation which is about human affect, emotions, memory, and history into a search button where you just press search? And then there was a whole other conversation of, I thought I was trying to explain to my grandmother that Siri is not a person, but that it's actually just an artificial intelligence chatbot. And then she said, that can't be true because you have two cousins who work with Apple. So what do you think they do? And my grandmother really thought my cousins who work with Apple sit there and pretend to be Siri and are talking to her in real life, right? So these kinds of tacit knowledges, which is not necessarily only looking at people who are resisting, but people who cannot be made intelligible into the framework of the user that has been installed in these intimate relationships with technologies. And the way we naturalize that kind of behavior towards those who do not have literacy, agency, different frameworks of engaging with that information. And that's something that I'm struggling with, but I want to continue struggling with because that's where the resistance is going to be.
Okay. There is also like Nikki Stevens. Is she online as well? Yeah. You should take over the mic right now.
Sure. Thank you for your really thoughtful talk. I appreciated the way that you brought in the gendered history of computation, the invisibility of folks who do moderation and automation work, who make automation possible. One of the things that I found really interesting in your talk was the tension between the way that you sort of reduce intimacy to touch for the sake of this conversation, but then also expand intimacy to include history, marginalization, systems of oppression, questions of equality. And I'm wondering, I would just love to hear you talk a little bit more about that tension between sort of the flattening of intimacy to physical touch, and then also the kind of hydration and richness that you're bringing to it.
Wow, thank you. I think that's actually a more coherent version of my thesis than I had thought it was. So let me give it a shot. I was actually quite struggling when I started framing the talk about saying, why am I obsessing so much about touch? And I think one of the reasons was the fact that I am touchless right now, like in social isolation. I haven't touched a human person in 3 months now. And there was something about the tactile nature of intimacy, which I think has been missing from a lot of our lives. But I also wanted to narrow down on touch simply because so much of the future of the GUI is seen as haptic and tactile technologies which are coming in, right? So from gestures to wearable technologies to even more invasive forms of technology which we wear or which are kind of doing brainwave mapping and neuroscience, cognition, and so on and so forth. So I did want to begin with narrowing down onto the touch, also because within feminist history and queer activism, we have talked about the fact that the touch is often the contact point of pathologization and penalization in many ways. So especially growing up in a country like India, being queer, and recognizing that you are born a criminal because you are born queer. The interactions of touch were so bizarre, right? In a country also where there is not really enough a culture of expression. So I keep on joking about how my parents, when I was growing up, have never said to me that they love me. Because I can't think of any Indian language where you can say, I love you with a straight face, because it just doesn't make sense. Like culturally, it doesn't decode. And hence it's a very tactile country where there is lots of different kinds of touches which are present. And I wanted to just bring in the idea that intimacy, while even when it is connected through digital devices and interfaces, is encoded with so much historicity, materiality, desire, and in some fact, perhaps agency. And so I was trying to kind of weave it through. And thank you for noticing that I'm flattening it only to expand it and talk about touch not as just a one-on-one individual affect, but being touched by so many different discourses, legacies, and absences more than anything else was something that I wanted to focus on.
I appreciate that. I'm going to stop talking in a second. I just want to also appreciate the way that you're kind of overloading the use of the word touch, in the sense that we're touching GUIs and touching technologies and using our bodies, and bringing back in feminist and queer embodiment theories, but also thinking about the way that we are metaphorically and psychically and socially touched by the cultures in which we're existing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment.
So how much time do we have still, actually? 10 minutes more. So
Okay.
I have the feeling, yes.
I think Anna wanted to say something for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nishan, for your fantastic three-part talk. I don't want to go deep into it because everybody has already kind of remembered really well. I wondered the following, though. With you articulating the discontent about or towards intimacy, which you present as with Sarah Ahmed as an effective regime somehow, and also which requires the invisibility of a certain kind of labor. Let's say it's maybe the expanding thing of domestic labor, the invisible labor, which is we need to have to facilitate intimacy. I really wonder how desirable do you think it is to actually reclaim that concept of intimacy? Is that something we should just leave away, or should we reclaim it? And if you think it would be good to reclaim it, what hopeful examples would you have to mention?
That's a tricky question. I understand what you are saying, that I am trying to populate intimacy with perhaps registers which are not its own. In some ways, it's like a quasi-queer practice of trying to keep a term in vogue. Maybe its time has come, and maybe we need to let it go. But I would say there are, at a personal and an intellectual level, perhaps two reasons why I would want to continue, if not occupying intimacy, then at least perching on it, as if in mid-flight, just to vacate it later. One, because without intimacy, I'm very scared of the transactional elements of our life, especially in the practices of caregiving that is being put into play right now. So be it European policies about how we are not going to support from Northern European countries, southern countries, because we might be close to them, but we don't have intimacy with them anymore. Right? It gets reduced to a certain kind of economic transaction. So there was certain geopolitics that I wanted to hang on to, saying intimacy, especially in a post-colonial context, for instance, is something that is demanded both of the former colonizer as well as the former post-colonial subject, because intimacy is not merely an affective state of being, but it also facilitates very awkward and strange conversations, right? I don't know how to say this to you, but I'm going to say this to you as a friend. That particular phrasing immediately invokes a certain intimate register, which is not of reciprocity, but this is coming out of conditions of care. And the second reason, and this is not my work, but I have been learning a lot, especially during this lockdown, from people who receive mental health care, and what has happened to them when intimacy between the caregiver and the care receiver has been completely removed because of the technological presence. On the one hand, there is a huge thrust for self-care by applications which you are supposed to use to monitor yourself. And on the other hand, there is also this distancing now that is coming forward in those conversations. And so I'm not sure if I want to let it go, but this is where the hopeful future for me is going to be. That, as my friend and colleague Seda Gursis says, the rectangles frame us and they never allow us to be intimate. They only allow us to be close. And then she says the only thing we can do is to make those rectangles messy. Let's bring our cats and pets and children and elders and shabby hair and unkempt bodies and messy clothes and dirty houses into the frame to keep on reminding people that at the end of the day, one of the things that connects us is this moments of intimacy, which in our everyday interpersonal practice bleeds in to our conversation. But in the rectangular shape of connected intimacy, it's not allowed, so to speak. So maybe that's one of the hopeful futures that I will have. I think what this social distancing and isolation has done is perhaps has given us glimpses into people's house. Wali was talking in our test run about people who are kind of decorating their backs with fancy books, which is supposed to show off their knowledge. And look at all of us. We don't have anything that shows our gravitas in the back. And I think that's already a form of intimacy performance, which is perhaps something I would still want to hold on.
There is a question from Diana, and I'm not sure if Diana is still online. Then yeah, please unlock Diana. Yeah, Diana, are you hearing us? You want to show up? Otherwise, I would read your question from the Etherpad. Is she coming?
Oh, she's unlocked now, but I'm not sure. She just has these headphones signals, so I think she just joined without a microphone, which makes it difficult to join us.
She's just a listener. Oh, that's
so. This is the messy. Already, we are already very messy.
Yeah.
Well, okay, then I read her question from the Etherpad. She says, I would ask about the fails perceptions of agency versus falling into the trap of self-commodization via social media. I mean, it's not a question, actually. It's just a comment, or...
No, I guess what she means is like that on social media, we kind of... commodify ourselves because it ties a bit in with our not existing bookcases. So I liked Anna's boxing sack thing in the background. How we present ourselves in social media is a kind of self-commodization, and we feel kind of as if, that's how I understood it, as if we have agency, but in fact our agency is very restricted in a very narrow sense.
I wish Diana was here. It's been a while since I saw her. So the next time I see you in Berlin, we shall talk more about this. I think it's an interesting staging because I'm not sure if the self-commoditization happens only via social media. I think self-commoditization happens when you accept the terms of service for installing an operating system onto your machine. You have already accepted that there is a certain granularization of yourself, that there is a certain collection of data, that there is a certain terms of services which are going to override what you think are your fundamental rights. And you have already accepted that when you put yourself as a user, you are already a commodity which is going to both consume and will be consumed in that stage. So I do want to take away, I am a prolific social media user, but I'm not trying to defend it. But I do want to kind of take it one step back and saying the precondition of closed digital systems is in fact commodification. That the digital has to deal with you as a finite, manageable resource which can be trafficked and circulated across its different networks and systems. And so you don't have to wait till you get to social media. From the first step, we are naturalizing the fact that we are being commodified in different ways by our systems.
Okay, I see Tina has Tina Auer, who we also asked to join us, has camera problems at the moment, but she wants to ask a question. Go ahead, Tina. And oh, Diana is coming.
She's typing.
I see Diana's hand or something. We see a blurry picture. Oh, well, maybe I just, while Diana is checking this out, I'll just read Tina's question, who wrote them in the chat. So she's interested in some mention you made in the third input towards the end. It's about the need of nuanced interventions when we next perform the glory of digital intimacy, including a call for radical openness, which needs to be taken into consideration. Interventions thinking of those who are made vulnerable, those who cannot afford to participate, and those who are historically deemed unacceptable and unworthy of intimacy. Would you like to outline some of your thoughts, how those nuanced interventions might be looking like and what they would include?
Wow, sorry, that's quite beautiful. And thank you, Tina. Sorry you couldn't come in person to talk to us. I think in some ways, I wanted to use intimacy as a way of remembering or reminding myself at least that the calls for openness often mimic the calls for intimacy. They presume a certain kind of subjectivity, a certain kind of affordance, historical, social, and technological capital, and the capacity to negotiate with the complex infrastructure that we often naturalize when talking about openness in a certain way. And so if you agree with my intervention of intimacy, that it demands us to be certain kind of people and certain kind of gentrified subjects, that it comes with historically overloaded connotations of bodies, what identities we bear, who is allowed to be consumed and presented in what way, and that it comes with an imperative that removes the work of invisible actors. There is perhaps a possibility to mark and transport all of that onto openness as well. That openness does exactly the same kind of tropes. And just because we often kind of do this, we are on the right side of history, we are resistant to certain capitalistic forces, it's often good to understand that the calls for openness, just like the calls for intimacy, often produce these regimes where people who cannot afford the glory of openness can still remain excluded out of those contexts. And so this was, thank you for allowing me to kind of make that connection more explicit, but that's what I was trying to look for, saying when we talk about technological openness, can we dislocate the subject from our fairly privileged subject positions who can afford opennesses, and what happens to people who cannot, will not, shall not participate for various reasons, both historically, cultural, and temporal. So, I mean, that would be kind of my thesis.
That is an important point, I think, also that, yeah, who's allowed to be open, definitely. And I think it's too rarely reflected upon also in our kind of circle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think we are nearly going into the final 2 minutes. So that's a question how we be together the last 2 minutes now somehow.
Yeah, unfortunately, it didn't really work out with Diana. I mean,
I think
now it's dark again.
I think she is doing a
We saw
performance. Actually, I mean, I mean, this is a performance, you know.
I think it's.
And
I think
it
it's
nice.
totally fitting.
Yes, it's totally fitting.
I mean, to what we talked, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Oh yeah, the audio is not well. I don't know. I mean, I think that was kind of a really nice closing statement that you already gave. So do you have a question, Ushi?
No, not really anymore, I have to say. I mean, there would be, of course, I mean, we could use much more time, but I don't have a question at the end of this session. It worked very well, but
maybe what's important is also maybe it's important to mention like the others who sent us questions that we unfortunately can't use, like Peter Westerfeld from Constant.
That's
and
true, yeah.
Marina Grzinic from Ljubljana and Vienna, and Diana, who didn't get the audio working, and all the people who kind of really wanted to join. We have like a bunch of questions, actually. It's just like really too difficult to choose one. Yeah. And it would be obviously great if we could meet together for a drink now, and
that's true.
For a drink now and continue this chat like in normal times.
Yeah. No, I think it's also one of the privileges, but also one of the problems of a keynote is that it is meta. And every question can actually lead to a very long discussion.
That's true, yeah.
And I don't have the answers for it either, but I think we can close it here. I just want to thank all of you for the patience, for such careful reading and viewing of the talks, Vali for such a caring reading of the text, and Ushi for bringing us all together and keeping us here. Like, it's fantastic. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great. And I hope the conversations will keep on coming back in different circles now in the event and also later. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well, Nishan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vali. And so I have to say goodbye, and I hope you can drop in the next days, Nishant, because there will be other possibilities also to exchange. We have also breakout rooms, not breakout rooms, like break rooms and stuff like this, and it would be nice also if you show up the one or the other day. That would be nice.
I'm going to try very hard. I'm struggling with a personal situation which has to do with my parents overstaying in Europe because their visa has expired, but we will figure it out.
Okay. I wish you all the best, and it was a pleasure to get to know. I hope we will once meet in person, so to say. And here and stay in touch is now the good ending, maybe. And bye-bye, Diana. Bye-bye, Vali. And see you soon. Ciao.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you soon, definitely.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.